Have you ever had the strange feeling that you're living a life that isn't yours? As if somewhere along the way, a moment you can't even pinpoint, you started giving away little pieces of your essence, just to fit into someone else's space. Most people think they know who they are, but what hardly anyone realizes is that what they call personality is often just a reflection of how others see them. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious manifests as fate." And maybe that's why you keep attracting the same conflicts, the same relationships, the same pain, even though you swear you've already learned the lesson. But what if the problem isn't you? What if it's the unconscious of others living inside of you? In this video, you'll discover how a soul can be colonized without screams, without violence, without warning, through manipulative praise, caring advice, draining connections, and relationships that reshape who you are. We're going to expose the 7 most dangerous types of people who silently invade your psyche and show you how to break free from this invisible prison. If you feel like you're carrying a weight that isn't yours, this video will hand you the key. But a word of caution, once you see this, you can't unsee it. Because once you understand how the unconscious works, you stop being a puppet and return to being a soul. The danger you don't see. He seemed harmless, maybe even too kind. A polite smile, sweet words, always ready to lend a hand. But something felt off, a subtle, almost invisible discomfort in the air. Carl Jung would call this a contaminated psychic field. Danger doesn't always arrive with a scream, sometimes it whispers. And the quietest whispers are the ones that distort the soul the most. The real threat isn't in the obvious monsters, but in the well-dressed shadow, the smiling persona that drains you while pretending to care. And when this invisible danger enters your life, it doesn't break in. It settles in slowly. First, it earns your trust. Then it takes up space. And finally, it redefines who you are. The strangest part, you think you're being loved, when in reality, you're being shaped, colonized by someone else's unconscious. Many people go years without realizing they've been living with the brakes on, emotionally paralyzed by someone close. It could be a partner, a boss, a friend, or even a parent who never raised a hand but always manipulated with silence. This kind of relationship is like poison in drops, imperceptible, but cumulative. It reshapes your ego, your spirituality, your desires, until one day you wake up unsure if what you feel is truly yours, or just something someone else programmed into you. And when you finally realize you're lost, you don't even know where to begin. The first step? Observe. Look for people who constantly make you doubt yourself. Notice situations where you walk away feeling drained and you can't explain why. These are clues, the footprints of someone else's ego trying to steer your life. The soul senses it, and when it does, it goes quiet. But its silence is a scream, and don't think this only happens to weak people. More often than not, the most sensitive and empathetic are the perfect targets, exactly because they carry the archetype of the healer, the savior, the "I can handle it." And they do handle it until they can't anymore. This danger you don't see doesn't come in one shape. It can show up as emotional blackmail, disguised as advice, as subtle sarcasm, as an innocent comparison. The name for this is shadow work. The moment you realize that part of your suffering didn't start with you, it was planted. And this is where the rupture begins, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When the mask falls, healing begins. But beware. The next step might catch you off guard, because sometimes the real danger isn't just out there, the unconscious manipulator. He doesn't even realize he's manipulating, and that's exactly what makes him so dangerous. The unconscious manipulator truly believes he's helping, correcting, guiding. His tone is soft, His gaze is sympathetic, but somehow, around him, you always feel smaller. He acts with the conviction that he's doing good, when in reality, he's unloading his own unresolved neuroses into others. Carl Jung called this projection, when the ego tries to disown parts of itself by pushing them onto someone else's reality. And that's exactly what this person does. He transfers what he refuses to face in himself, turning you into an emotional dumpster. The problem is, many times, you allow it, because the manipulation comes dressed as care, as concern. But beneath it all, it drains you, and you feel guilty for not knowing how to escape. This kind of manipulator feeds off your self-doubt. He tells you you're amazing, but you need to work on a few things. He says he trusts you, but thinks you should be a little more grateful. There's always a but waiting to dim your light, and behind that polished front lies an insecure ego, one that found in your soul a fertile ground to project its own lack. The most tragic part, often he's completely unaware he's doing it. He doesn't know he's passing on his shadow, and neither do you. That's why true spirituality demands clarity. Because many well-intentioned people keep acting out emotional domination without even realizing it. And you only begin to realize it when a part of you starts wanting to disappear. Literally, your body grows tired, your intuition screams, but the fear of rejection keeps you frozen. To break this cycle, you have to wake up from emotional hypnosis. And that begins with a brutally simple question. Am I trying to be loved or trying to be myself? Because the unconscious manipulator always loves you more when you adjust, not when you express. And there lies the dilemma. The more you adapt, the less you feel like yourself. A practical exercise: start listing every time you say yes when you really want to say no. Notice patterns of guilt that show up when you simply choose yourself. Shadow work isn't just about looking at your pain, it's about returning what was never yours to carry. When you learn to recognize these subtle emotional invasions, you start to reclaim your inner sovereignty. And maybe, in that process, you'll find that the next danger wears an even more elegant disguise. The persona bearer, he's admired, respected, sometimes even envied. Always composed, articulate, intelligent, someone whose presence carries weight. But behind that flawless image hides a silent desperation, the fear of being found out. Carl Jung said the persona is the face we show the world, and the danger begins when we forget that it's just a mask. The persona bearer is trapped in the role he created in order to survive, and the more applause he receives, the more imprisoned he becomes. Because disappointing others starts to feel worse than betraying himself. The persona smiles, but inside, the emptiness is deafening. And the most tragic part? No one suspects a thing. He's mastered the performance of spirituality, of intelligence, of emotional balance, all to perfection. But the soul doesn't perform. This kind of person is often highly functional, organized, responsible, but inwardly they live in exhaustion, because keeping up a character demands relentless effort. And the harder they try to appear okay, the further they drift from their truth. The persona itself isn't the villain, it's a shield. The problem begins when the shield is never set down, when even in silence they feel the need to maintain a performance. Think of someone who can't cry even when they're alone, because they've internalized the belief that they're too strong for that. Or the one who helps everyone else but never asks for help, because the image they project leaves no room for vulnerability. This archetype is seductive but suffocating. At this stage, the ego doesn't want freedom. It wants acceptance, even if it costs the soul. Shadow work here isn't about destroying the persona. It's about remembering you are not it, and that takes courage. The courage to disappoint expectations, to dismantle old narratives, 2. For the first time, allow pain to appear without a filter. A powerful exercise? Write a letter you'll never show anyone. A letter where you don't have to impress a soul. Let it pour out. Not everything that comes out has to be pretty, but it has to be real. Because real spirituality doesn't live in perfection. It lives in wholeness. And sometimes, the most spiritual act you can take is to admit, I'm not okay. Believe me, the next type of danger is even more silent, because it doesn't pretend everything's fine. It simply hides everything. The repressed shadow holder. He seems calm, too calm. He never gets irritated, never loses control, never raises his voice. Always reasonable, always composed, always the bigger person. But behind that frozen serenity, there's a volcano on the verge of eruption. Carl Jung warned us, what we repress gets revenge. The shadow doesn't disappear, it accumulates. And when the ego refuses to face its own anger, envy, jealousy, or vanity, those emotions don't die. They hide, and over time they build pressure like a psychic pressure cooker no one sees. The repressed shadow holder is often proud of being different from the rest, when in fact he's far more controlled by his darkness than he realizes. Because the more you avoid your shadow, the more it controls you. This kind of person tends to grow cold, ironic, emotionally distant. They fear conflict, yet live in constant friction with their inner world. And the most dangerous part, they believe they're above these human emotions. This is one of the most deceptive archetypes of modern spirituality, the kind that uses light to hide pain, that quotes books, speaks beautifully, shares wise phrases, but has never truly faced their own abyss. For them, shadow work is just theory, because in practice, they still need to appear better than everyone else. But life doesn't tolerate self-betrayal forever, and sooner or later, the shadow erupts. In a breakdown, a crisis, a betrayal. The soul can tolerate repression for a while, but not forever. Want to begin breaking this cycle? Practice brutal honesty with yourself. Ask, what do I hate seeing in others that I may have buried in me? Make a list, spot patterns. Meditate, not to escape but to feel. Make space for uncomfortable emotions without trying to fix them. Name your anger. Give space to your jealousy. Allow sadness to speak. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you whole. True spirituality isn't about eliminating the shadow, but embracing it. And believe me, there is more light in someone who acknowledges their darkness than in someone who's obsessed with appearing flawless. But be careful, because there's a kind of darkness that doesn't scream. It imposes rules, and it claims it's doing so for the greater good. The moral controller. He knows what's right, and he makes sure you know it too, constantly. His moral compass appears unshakable, but strangely it only points outward. The moral controller believes he's preserving order, values, and the correct version of spirituality. But deep down, what he really craves is control. Carl Jung spoke of the dangers of unconscious fanaticism. The more someone clings to rigid morality, the more they're trying to silence an inner shadow that terrifies them. The controller doesn't just want you to change. He wants you to feel wrong for simply being who you are. And in this game of guilt and virtue, he gains power. Because if you accept the guilt, he becomes your judge. And few judges are as cruel as those who believe they're doing good. This archetype is common in religious families, rigid workplaces, and even within spiritual communities. He's that co-worker who points out everyone's faults, but never his own. The one who says you've lost your light because you expressed anger, who calls you egotistical when you're simply acting from a survival instinct. In his hands, morality becomes a weapon. And those who carry that weapon rarely notice the blood on their own fingers. The ego of this person fuses with their so-called divine mission. And that makes everything even more dangerous, because they genuinely believe they're saving you, when what they're really doing is crushing your individuality. Shadow work for them is almost heresy. The moral controller doesn't want to face the shadow, he wants to exterminate it. And in trying to do so within himself, he starts projecting it onto others. So, how do you break free? You disobey, internally. That doesn't mean becoming a reckless rebel, but a rebel with consciousness. Question the rules that suffocate you. Identify patterns of guilt that were taught to you, but no longer serve your life. Feel in your body when a demand isn't truly yours. It takes practice, it takes solitude, it takes courage to say, this doesn't resonate with me. And that's okay. A powerful read, The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. A reminder that not every rule is sacred, and not everything sacred comes from outside of you. The real spiritual path is wild, imperfect, deeply personal. And the more you free yourself, the more threatening you become. Not because freedom is aggressive, but because it challenges the next kind of ego, the one that bleeds in silence and turns everything into drama. The complexed one, he's in a constant battle with himself, and most of the time he doesn't even realize he's his own enemy. The complexed one has a distorted view of his own identity, and because of that, he tries to shape the world around him in ways that make him feel like he belongs. Carl Jung spoke at length about the complexity of the ego, and that's exactly where this person gets lost. He becomes a prisoner of a fragmented part of himself, a version that was never accepted. Sometimes it's an inferiority complex, a deep fear of never being good enough. Other times it's the opposite, a superiority complex that tries to mask insecurity by pretending to be above everyone else. But the cruel irony is this: the more he tries to overcome that piece of himself, the more that piece takes control. Unlike other types, the complexed one knows he's in pain. He just doesn't know what to do with it. That's his tragedy. He's so caught up in trying to be perfect or to be liked that he loses touch with who he really is. He changes his voice, his behavior, his style, his values, all in pursuit of acceptance that never truly arrives. Picture someone who's always trying to fit into a group but never feels like they belong, or someone obsessively managing their appearance, terrified that their imperfections will be noticed. The reality is, this inner struggle never ends until the complexed one turns toward his shadow, and that only begins when he finally stops running from his flaws and starts loving himself with them. The key here is to embrace vulnerability as a form of strength. A powerful practice is to ask yourself, what am I hiding from myself out of fear of rejection? Then work on self-compassion. Begin with simple actions like journaling about your insecurities or meditating daily with gentleness. And when the shadow shows up, because it will, breathe deeply. Let yourself be imperfect. In the process of individuation, Jung teaches that every part of us has a purpose. The complexed one needs to understand there is no shame in being who you are. In fact, it's a radical act of emotional rebellion to free yourself from these invisible prisons. True freedom doesn't come from being admired by others. It comes from finding peace in who you are. No mask required. The psychic vampire. He doesn't bite your neck, he drains your soul. The psychic vampire is the kind of person who, the moment they leave the room, everything feels lighter. But while they're there, the air feels heavy. Carl Jung would say this type is a master at projecting their shadow. Instead of facing their own pain, they radiate guilt, drama, neediness, and fear. But never directly. They victimize themselves, sabotage their own lives, shrink in self-pity, and somehow make you feel responsible for rescuing them. And that's where the game begins. They need you alert to them, but never awake to yourself. Because if you connect with your spiritual center and strengthen your healthy ego, you start to see. And once you see, you disappear. And to them, there's nothing more threatening than someone who has learned to protect their own energy. This person often shows up in your moments of vulnerability, when you're unsure, sensitive, emotionally open. They arrive with a mix of affection and chaos, and they feed on your empathy. The more you try to help, the deeper they sink, and the more they pull you down with them. The psychic vampire is often someone who outright refuses to do shadow work. They'd rather remain the poor thing, the victim, the misunderstood one, anything but responsible for their own pain. And the cruelest part? They use emotional bonds as currency. They say they need you, that they only trust you, that you're all they have. But in the end, you become the container for a darkness they refuse to face. A psychic drain. And if you're not careful, you'll start to believe it's your purpose to carry it. Want to break free? Set clear boundaries, even if they sting. Start with simple, firm phrases. I hear you, but I can't carry this for you. I'm here, but I won't lose myself for anyone. It might feel harsh at first, but it's deeply liberating. A powerful book for deeper insight, People of the Lie by M. Scott Peck. A brilliant look at how evil often hides behind kindness. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's spiritual intelligence. Because every time you allow this kind of psychic invasion, you disconnect from yourself. And without that connection, you become easy prey for those looking to colonize your soul. But there is an antidote, a silent, profound force that once activated, changes everything. And sometimes it begins with nothing more than a look, the awakening gaze. It's not always a word, not always a hug. Sometimes everything begins with a look. A gaze that pierces through you, that breaks you open, that shakes you awake. A look that doesn't try to fix you or judge you. It simply sees you, truly sees you. Carl Jung said that when one soul recognizes another, something moves in the unconscious. And it's in that quiet shift that awakening happens, not like a thunderclap, but like a breeze that stirs the air and rearranges everything inside you. The awakening gaze is the one that reactivates your ancestral memory. That reminds you who you were before you tried to fit into the world. That invites you to strip away the persona, to dissolve the ego, to dive into your own shadow, not to destroy yourself, but to set yourself free. Have you ever crossed paths with someone like that? Someone who didn't say much, but made you rethink your entire life. It's subtle, but brutal, because that kind of presence gives you back to yourself. And that can be terrifying when you've spent your life performing, pleasing, hiding. This look doesn't complement your act. It sees through it, and it finds what's left behind it. Sometimes it comes from a stranger, a mentor, a therapist, someone in a cafe, or from you looking into your own reflection. Real spirituality begins when that gaze turns inward, when you learn to look at yourself without filters, when you can stand in the presence of your own truth. At this point, shadow work stops being a process and becomes a way of existing. And once you see, you can't unsee. Once you awaken, you never sleep the same again. If you want to cultivate that gaze in yourself, start small. When you wake up, ask, what do I need to see today that I've been avoiding for years? When you meet someone, try to look past the role they play. Practice presence. Read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, not as a manual, but as a reminder. And remember, individuation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to what was always there, suffocated, distorted, silenced. That gaze is the beginning of reconnection with the self. It doesn't impose, it illuminates. It doesn't force, it reveals. And sometimes all it takes to change your entire life is to finally see yourself. Because once you truly see yourself, you stop abandoning yourself. And in that instant, something far greater than you begins to guide. Now that you've seen this clearly, The question is, what will you do with this truth? Will you keep shrinking to fit into someone else's space? Or will you finally begin to take up your own? Most people never wake up because it takes courage. Courage to disappoint, courage to set boundaries, courage to say, this isn't mine. But if something here moved you, it means the calling has already begun inside you, and it won't go away. Because awakening isn't an event, it's a journey. And that journey is only beginning. Here, every video is a piece of the puzzle. With every episode, with every reflection, you become more whole, more awake, more free. This channel isn't just about spirituality, it's about truth. It's for those who are done living anesthetized and are ready to live awakened, like a series you can't stop watching, because in each chapter, a piece of you comes home. So if this resonated with you, hit the bell, subscribe, and stay close. Because the next videos will cut even deeper and heal even stronger. And who knows, maybe the next episode is exactly what your soul's been waiting to hear.